Good evening. We'll call to order if we can all stand to salute to the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We can just have a moment of silence. Thank you. We're just going to right into the public participation. Thank you, Madam Superintendent. We'll start at the top. Mercedes Hernandez Rondon, 6 Hamlet Street. Will they be speaking? Just, again, just repeat your name and address for the record. Yeah, before you start, we have 2 minutes. This is for everybody, 2 minutes. You have to direct the board is entirely, not anyone individually. Thanks. And the bell will ring in a minute and a half.
Okay. My name is Mercedes Hernandez Rondon. I live at 6 Hamlet Street, Lawrence, Massachusetts, 01843. And I would like my statement to be recorded for public records. I'm not here to talk about school personal matters, but I'm here before you tonight to request that you, within the framework of your competence, do everything possible within your power to make the Lawrence Public Schools fulfill their duty and provide my daughters a safe and healthy, appropriate environment so that they can exercise their right to education. All schools in Massachusetts and the United States of America are required to provide their students with a safe, healthy, appropriate environment. The existence of such an environment is essential so that children can attend and exercise their right to education. Failing to provide a student with this environment is to deny the right to education. The Lawrence Public Schools do not provide my daughters with a school environment where they can feel and be safe without having to experience fear, and that's denying the right to education. Lawrence Public Schools has failed to enforce the only and insufficient action or measure that they have committed to enforce before a case of harassment from one of their staff members against a 9-year-old child, my daughter. If the Lawrence Public School does not take measures that are sufficient so my kids can remain and stay in school without feeling the anguish caused by fear or encountering at any time a staff member that can cause and that has caused her so much pain and suffering, then the public schools of Lawrence are denying my daughter her right to education. I'm here to question the lack of appropriate response from the Lawrence Public Administration so my daughters can attend school as normal kids without the fear of, at any point in time, being harassed by a member of their staff. So I'm here to request for your help to do anything possible that you can.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Tom Myers, name and address for the record.
Tom Myers, and my address 550 Haverhill Street. And I'd like to just make a few remarks here tonight. And I think the first is I put on everybody's table, I think except I might have missed Stacy and Donna, and that's an invitation to an education legislative forum which is coming up on December 11th. And the reason for it is to put pressure on our elected state legislators to properly fund public education, and particularly to fund the gateway cities such as Lawrence. The Joint Committee, review committee on the foundation budget, came up with the figure of a 23% deficit, and that was a couple years ago. And if you look, and multiply what Lawrence receives by the 23%, which is probably underestimated given it's a couple years old, it was at least $40 million that would be extra money. And so that is the first thing that I wanted to address, and hopefully we'll have all of you present there and willing to speak to our legislators about the importance of fully funding our public schools. The second is on December 5th, there is a hearing on the Equity Lab Charter School. And I'm going to also ask that you come as elected officials to address that issue and to address the issue that we don't need other charter schools. They were rejected by the state overwhelmingly in the question 2 vote 2 years ago, and in Lawrence it was also democratically rejected. $8 million are lost to Lawrence Public Schools, or $8 million in additional funds would be lost if this school comes online. And instead we could better serve the students of Lawrence by properly funding our schools. And lastly, as I've stated several times here, I asked publicly that our school committee begins to move forward with a transition plan to take full control. As a member of the city, I voted for people on this board, and I expect that the people I voted for as a citizen have that ability to serve. The woman that came prior to myself spoke about some issues which obviously are very serious, and you should be able to be the ones to address them. You're the people that stand before the citizens of our wonderful city and are the ones who were elected and are accountable, not an appointed board by an appointed person who was appointed by an appointed board, so that democracy is so far removed, we begin to look like a feudal hierarchy rather than a democratic society. So thank you for listening to my remarks.
Joan, I'm gonna keep time. It's better if I keep time.
Well, I just didn't want to.
That's okay, I'll keep time.
Use short notice.
That's okay, I'll keep time.
Well, I got the discount for being
I think it was all worth hearing. Elisa Rizzo, please. Name and address for the record.
Good evening, Yaritza Rizzo, 33 Boston Street. Like I said, I am a community organizer at Lawrence Community Work, and I'm also a parent of 2 children at LPS schools. And the reason I come forward this evening is due to the concern of the school lunches that our children are receiving. For the past year, we've been working with a group of parent leaders at Lawrence Community Work, and one of the concerns that has been part of this group has been the school lunch. They've expressed the choices of lunches that the children receive, the presentation of lunches, how these lunches are being presented to the children, and the time that the children are being allowed to eat their lunch. We would suggest that superintendent visit schools and see what goes on in the kitchen, and also see the presentation of these lunches to our children. And we would also like to continue to be able to discuss these concerns with the school committee, the school district, and parents. I do have a comment from one of our parents that couldn't be here tonight, and this is the parent Wanda Pina, and I'll read it in Spanish first, since that's the language she chose to send it in. Me gustaría saber si antes de elaborar el menú para el año escolar, hacen una prueba para saber si el estudiante realmente se comerá lo preparado o servido. Pienso que en hacer esta prueba los desperdicios serían mucho menos. And I'm going to translate, and she says, and quote,
30 seconds.
I would like to know if before establishing a menu, there's a trial time where it is determined where the children would eat the lunch. So like this, we wouldn't be wasting so much lunch or lunches in our school. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Jennifer Jimenez. Name and address for the record.
Jennifer Jimenez, 4 Union Street. Ms. Rizzo actually brought up one of the concerns I had, so I'm all set. My concern was children's lunches in Lawrence Public Schools. Thank you.
The next one is Dan Rivera, 1 Thomas Road. Thank you. And I can't get, I won't say anything. I just thought that, I did not think ahead of time to put this matter on the agenda, but I think that it's appropriate to give an update on the current situation around the gas fire crisis. As it stands today, in Lawrence, 88% of the residential meters have been relit. they have about, that's roughly 3,850 meters. If you do times 1.2 is 1.5 is what I've been doing. It's about 7,500 homes. No, that's not right. 5,000 something homes in Lawrence. It's 7,000 something district-wide, around the areas. But that many homes, so we're at the tail end of this. The understanding is that most people will be home lit with heat and hot water by December 2nd, with a small trail of people through the 16th who might still need their stove or their dryer. I don't think I know. They're going to double shifts on the dryers and the stoves because they're making so much progress with the heat and hot water. But that all should be contained within the time frame of December 16th, if not sooner. We do still have people living in alternative housing, and for Lawrence, right now that's 845 families are still living in temporary housing. That's down from a high of almost 2,000. Most of those people have gone home because their houses have been relit with heat and hot water. The one that I think everybody really wants to know about, how many families do we still have in the RVs? That number is under 200 families still in the RVs across the 3 locations. They will be starting to remove some of the RVs off of our sites coming up shortly. Starting Thursday, you're going to see some leaving the South Common, and from then, as soon as they leave, people actually go back to their homes. Then they're going to break down the whole ones, which is the South Common, the one at Pemberton, and the one at Sullivan Park. People are going to continue to get their claim process. If folks haven't had a claim yet, please submit a claim. That's the best way to get yourself made whole. Don't feel like if you're trying to get stuff and you feel like a little guilty about asking for things, don't. That's why they have this process. We didn't ask for this mess in our community, but we are encouraging you to try to get as much as you can to make yourself whole. If your kid needs or your family needs some type of therapy, go search that out, and Columbia Gas will pay for that. There is some information Thursday night at the Lawrence High School that for renters and for landlords around what to do about paying rent. And I'll make sure that before we end here, I'll get the information about when and where that is. I think that's all I have for an update on that. And then lastly, I would encourage everyone to come out on the 5th and speak out against the charter school application that's out there. I think it's a travesty of an application, and the last thing we need now is that to muddy the waters and the good work we're doing here. Thanks. We'll try to put that on the agenda the next time so that we can make sure we get a good update on that matter. So next thing on the agenda is communications and reports. First at the top of the agenda is the MCAS chronic absenteeism presentation. Madam Superintendent.
Thank you. So tonight I want to share with you our accountability data, and specifically I want to give you highlights about 2 new measures that the state, new accountability measures, which one of them is chronic absenteeism. So our new accountability system is designed for districts to better understand some of the highlights and some of the challenges that schools continue to have, and more importantly, for us to design supports around that. We continue to have achievement measures. We still have student growth. Those are all similar to what we've been accustomed to. We have high school completion measures. We have progress, this is a new one, towards English proficiency. The second new one is chronic absenteeism. And lastly, advanced coursework completion. Tonight, I'll show you a breakdown of all of these, and at the conclusion of this presentation, I'll be happy to entertain questions. So the overall accountability rating is relative statewide, and we also measure it grade to grade. The school classification is based on the overall accountability percentiles, and percentiles, of course, are from 1 to 99, and it's calculated by other accountability data, which you'll see shortly. Our schools are classified in two categories. One is schools that require additional assistance or interventions. You will see that to our left side, we have 3 schools that are meeting targets. We have, in the middle, 5 schools that are partially meeting our targets. And to our right side, we have a total of 10 schools in that accountability where they're requiring additional assistance or intervention. As a result, Lawrence Public School is still classified as a chronically underperforming district in need of comprehensive support. The chart that you see here is labeled from schools, are schools that are hold to this accountability system, and we've kept confidentiality of our schools as we believe that the district requires comprehensive support, so we want to be able to work with our schools individually, and we want to make sure that all schools feel like they're getting the required support. So from left to right, you will see that we have the schools requiring additional assistance, and then in the blue, the schools that are meeting, not requiring the additional assistance. Next is our progress towards improvement, and our schools are expected to make progress in the different accountability areas, and it's the state that decides what the targets are for improvement for each of our schools. So the overall targets and percentages indicate the degree to which individual schools have met their targets. So as an example, if our school meets 50% of their targets, they have made improvement over the prior year. So on the left-hand side, you'll see that 4 of our schools actually declined in terms of those targets. We have 7 of our schools with no changes, and then 7 of our schools with improved or have met targets. This chart shows you that same data. It is just in a bar graph, so you will see on the left-hand side the 4 schools that we just talked about, continued by the yellows with no changes, followed by the green and the blue who have improved or met the targets. So the standards testings have been evolving for a few years now. We're constantly trying to keep up, if you would, with the different measures. And so what happens now is students in grades 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th, and 8th are taking next generation MCAS in both English, so English language arts, and math. And then this year, the students took legacy MCAS tests. We're still using it for our 5th graders and 8th graders in science. And of course, our 10th graders in ELA math and science, which is required for graduation purposes. This test measures are very rigorous. They're also now being taken on computer. They're computer-based. And it also has a different scoring measures for meeting or exceeding, much higher than we were accustomed to before, which was a proficient and advanced range. So here's what it looks like for us here in Lawrence, which is in grades 3 to 8, the percent of students that were meeting and exceeding expectations increased slightly from 26% to 28% this past year. And then we saw some pretty good gains in grades 3, 4, 5, and 6. However, we saw a decline in grades 7, 8, and 10. And again, this is English language arts. For math, again, we see improvement for our students in 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. with a slight improvement, in grade 8 improved slightly, and grade 10, no changes in the math. In science, our students scoring proficient and advanced increased in grades 5 and 10, with a slight decline for our middle schoolers. So this is better appreciated in your packets, a little bit hard for me to read, at least over there on the big chart. What you see here is that 71% of our schools increased the percentage of meeting and exceeding expectations in our ELA, and 71% of our students the same in science. This chart shows us the comparison change to the state, and what you can see in the green, that is consistently Lawrence has made equal if not better gains from the state in both ELA. You see that in math there was no change for grade 10, a slight increase or the same as the state, and in science we did better than the states in grade 5. We did better than the state in grade 10, and the same for grade 8. Student growth performance is an important one. This actually measures student growth against themselves between this year and the year before. And the schools are expected to demonstrate this growth in student performance. So the range is between 40 and 59. We would call that average or typical. And then anything over 60 is high. You see in the green that we have 83% of our schools in the average range of, in the high range, so it's above the 40% SGP in ELA. And then you have 72% of our schools achieving the average. And then the white ones, not quite, so we still have a few schools that are not quite there. Next, we're going to talk about the high school. They have their own indicators. Here's our 4-year cohort graduation rate, which has improved. So the 4-year cohort graduation rate is a representation of students in the cohort that have graduated in 4 years or less. The annual dropout rate is at a historic low. So this one measures students in grades 9 to 12 who have dropped out of school in a given year. And lastly, extended engagement rate has also improved. So this is a rate that total for a 5-year cohort graduation, plus the percentage of students from the cohort that remain enrolled after 5 years. Excuse me. Advanced coursework has also improved. You see that the new indicators reporting the percentage of all students in grade 11 and 12 that achieve a passing score in at least one advanced coursework. Now here are the 2 new indicators. One is progress towards attaining English proficiency, and as you all know, our student population is high for ELS. And then the second one is chronic absenteeism, which I'll get into a little bit more briefly in a moment. But here's our English language proficiency. So this is progress made by our English learners towards achieving English proficiency. And it's measured by calculating the percentage of the students who meet their annual target by a test that we call Access. That is a test that all of our students take in the spring, and then we will report back late spring actually on the results of that. And it's measured by the elementary and middle schools, and then disaggregated by the high school. And here is our numbers for the chronic absenteeism, which is defined by missing 10% or more of a school year. I'll break this down a little bit because that can translate to about 4 days since the beginning of the school year, so I'll show you a little bit of what that might look like. So district-wide, chronic absenteeism is up in the elementary and middle school levels, and it is up also in the high school, which means our students, there's a challenge with our students being present for school. All right, let's look at that a little bit more. So as we all know, students who miss an average of 14 days of school each year between the time they arrive with us, whether it's preschool or kindergarten and all the way to they graduate, are missing 180 days. That's like a whole school year. And then by 6th grade, what we also know and research says is that chronic absences become a leading indicator for our kids to drop out. We see that as early as our 10th grader, 9th graders, but it is a leading indicator for our students. So students who are chronically absent are really, really at risk for falling behind. We wanted to show you also what it looks like for our neighboring districts, and you see that as compared to Methuen, Lowell, and Haverhill, I'll have you take a look at that. So that indicates the percentage of students who are chronically absent decreased from 2017 to 2018. In Haverhill and in Methuen, not so much for us. So here's what we know so far about our absenteeism. We have a snapshot here of students for the past 45 days of school who have missed 4 or more days, and those are students who are considered chronically absent. So by grade level, what you see here is that we have between our 1st and 5th grader, we'll call those elementary students. Kindergarten, by the way, is not a grade that is mandatory, so it's not measured by the state. However, we do keep track of our kindergartners as well. So for the sake of this discussion, we'll call grades 1 through 5 elementary, and you see the numbers on the right-hand side has most of our 1st graders at the highest rate of absenteeism so far. Then we have our 6th, 7th, and 8th grader sort of in the middle range or the average range of being absent. So again, these are students who have been absent 4 or more days and 45 days. Here are our high schoolers, and you see that we have our seniors at the highest rate of absenteeism right now, the highest rate at 35%. And again, 4 days or more and 45 days, we consider that chronic absenteeism. So we've been thinking about that, and there's definitely a lot for us to continue to dig deeper on, and we have some ideas about that, and there's some learning opportunities. Our next steps, which include for accountability data, including the chronic absenteeism, is really thinking through about our schools that need that focused, targeted support, including those 2 schools that need the additional broad and comprehensive support. We've begun that work already to include deploying additional resources to those schools and supports in the form of time, people, and money. We're going to continue to think about closing the gap and sharing successful strategies across our schools. We do that with meeting with our principals and school administrations and central office leaders. And we're also looking very closely at our chronic absenteeism and have started conversations with parent leaders, teachers, and students on root cause analysis, and we'll be meeting with school leaders and hosting workshops and really spreading most of this data across our community to really develop strategic plans for tackling this challenge.
Well, that was a lot of information, so I'm glad that we got this information ahead of time. Anybody have any questions?
So, Superintendent.
Committeewoman.
Oh, sorry.
Seward, how you doing? Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Superintendent Paris, has there been any analysis looking at the school year 18-19 around how the gas explosions and tragedy has impacted both MCAS performance and/or absenteeism?
Yeah, we're definitely taking in consideration, and we're in conversations with the state to keep track of the time of the explosion and crisis, and our South Side students and siblings and other students who've been affected by that. And that's one part of it, 1%, one part, but we're definitely taking in consideration that that has affected some of our attendance this year. With respect to MCAS, it's soon to know what will happen because the students won't be taking those tests until the spring. We do have high schoolers that are taking some makeup tests right now, but not for the general, for the most of our students.
Anything else?
So could you maybe speak to some of the supports that are in place for families who have been displaced as it relates to this? And my second question would be around the schools that have shown some decline. And I heard you say that you were starting to look at root cause analysis. Are there any kind of common threads that you see with the schools who had some modest declines?
I wouldn't say that across the district, across the schools, there are trends, but when we had conversations about root cause analysis, there was a really interesting conversation to hear parents and students and administrators and teachers think through. I heard and learned things like, our students have dental appointments, they have eye doctor appointments, those kinds of appointments, and so families will take them to the appointments, but they don't come back. And so there was a little bit of confusion from parents, like, what do you mean you don't get credit for the day, as an example, right? There was confusion with our families with respect to, well, I sent in a note because my student was sick and they turned in the homework, shouldn't they get credit for the day? So those were really good and interesting conversations. From our students, we learned that school might not be that interesting sometimes, so I'm choosing not to go. From our families and middle schoolers, families say, well, I have to work early, so I'm trusting that my tween or teenager gets themselves to school. So if they miss the bus or they don't have a ride, now they're staying home. There were many, 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 variables that people were discussing. And so right now, we're still discussing that with administrators. And we're going to be sharing next month at the principals meeting strategies that some schools are using. They have a lot of interesting initiatives to support and motivate and incentivize students to be at school. And it'll be differentiated. Every school, every grade level needs something a little bit different.
Thank you.
Dr. Rivera?
Yes, Superintendent Paris, just still trying to digest all the information. But what really stuck out to me were the 4 schools that declined in performance and the 7 in which there were no changes. In terms of contracts with any test prep companies or agencies, have you evaluated the efficacy of those contracts with those affiliated schools? I don't know which schools decline in performance, which ones had no changes versus which ones are contracted with ANET, iReady, or anything like that, but have you reviewed that?
Yeah, so most of the schools that had no change in performance or a decrease we've looked at. It's a combination. So we do have some schools that there were things like changing in staffing. There were things like changing in the structure that teaching and learning happen. An example of that is in one of our elementary schools, they departmentalize, which means that 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders get their ELA with one teacher and then their math with another teacher. And they changed that. And so that was a shift in the way they were doing things. Didn't work, right? So that affects certain things. With respect to interim testing and benchmark testing, it's a mix across the schools. Some schools use it and some schools don't. But the declines were the ones that we were most worried about because they were doing well. And so we dug into that, and there are different variables for that. So we haven't been determining, the answer is like, we don't think the correlation with the benchmark testing or the interim testing is the reason they decline or didn't make progress. There's no correlation right now.
Okay.
You have a follow-up on that? Because I wanted to follow up on that.
Sure, sure.
So, were you asking, in those two in the places that we are, are the ones that went down or stayed the same, are we contracting with prep test companies in that?
Yeah,
in
and
those
have we
schools?
evaluated the efficacy,
Yeah, if it's worth it.
if that's working?
I don't think there's a correlation is the answer. I don't, because we had schools who made no changes and schools who made lots of changes who are also using benchmarking testing, yeah.
I just wanted to follow up with regards to that, because in working in the community and volunteering with students and helping them with their homework, what we see a lot is a lot of test prep handouts, a lot of testing handouts to practice for the test. Essentially, it looks like they're being taught to a test. So how is the data really a depiction of growth if what we're seeing is a lot of teaching to that test?
This current data, you're saying? How is it a depiction of the growth as measured by our benchmark? I'm not clear.
As measured, I'm saying year to year,
Uh-huh.
if we're measuring growth and performance,
Mhm.
but we're teaching to a test, how does that data accurately represent student performance and student growth if what we see is a lot of teaching to a test?
Well, student growth matters to us because what that means is that if I was a third grader and had a benchmark test, and I now have had the practice and the skills on how my test is going to be presented to me, the level of rigor, the curriculum matched to the standard, and I've made progress as a fourth grader, yet I'm not meeting standard, progress matters to us. It means that we're using the data to drive instruction. So the SGP that I showed you earlier matters. And so what you saw is that most of our schools are exceeding that student growth, with the exception of 4 schools. In math and 3 schools in ELA, we see growth for our students. And that matters a lot because it tells me that teachers are able to use data to drive the instruction.
Gotcha. And then the other concern I wanted to bring up is the chronic absenteeism. Have you evaluated that based off of seasons? Because what we hear a lot in the wintertime, because there's no shoveling of the sidewalks, because there's no bus transportation, there's a lot of concerns in regards to safety with sending their children to school. And that is a reason why a lot of children miss school here in Lawrence during the winter time. Does the data show that?
It's a great idea. We don't have data yet to do that, but we're going to be sort of launching a campaign between January and early June, and then compare it to last year for the same reason that you're mentioning. We wonder also, is it because of, we heard this actually in a parent forum, they said, you know, if it's too cold and I have to walk, I might not go. Or if it's too cold and my student has a sniffle, I don't want to risk that. We don't know that yet. We'll be able to tell later in the early winter and until the late spring.
One last question. In regards to standardized testing, you know, we measure our students every year, but once they graduate, we don't track progress. And one of the biggest concerns that have been talked about in the community is the fact that many students are graduating the Lawrence High and are being forced to take remedial courses at community college because they're not prepared. So can you talk a little bit more about that in terms of the high school requirement to pass the MCAS? Is it really a depiction of readiness to graduate?
I think you're right. It's not a correlation. It's also true for other districts. So the question is, how can you pass MCAS in the 10th grade, yet still need remediation as a college student? So what we've learned is that the standards and the benchmark and the summative test, which is MCAS, is not a direct correlation with your ability to be ready for skills in college. You're right about that. So I think we have to address that in a different way, which is how we design instruction at the high school level and way before that.
Thank you.
Great. Anyone else? Ms. Mariano.
Superintendent, could you give me an example, or give the committee an example? You're talking about focused, targeted supports with schools. Could you give one specific example as to what is happening to help these schools out?
Sure. So 2 of our schools right now are going to be engaging in additional training on how to lead teams. They are going to go to a course called DataWise, And so it's really a framework and a better understanding of how you lead teams with a variety of data sources. They're going to spend a week long institute, they call it, at Harvard. So those two schools in particular, along with central office support, are going to be taking that training and then come back, teach it to their other schools, and then we'll have another team go. So we're slowly going to start building capacity internally of the teachers and the staff. That's one example.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? I got a few.
Yeah.
Can you go back in the extended engagement rate? Can we, I'm not really sure I got that.
Sure.
I'm still with that meant.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just don't know how to read this chart. So
All right, so
is it the number of years, because it says a 5-year cohort, that means the number of kids who were taking longer than 4 years to graduate?
correct.
And that number is up for us.
Well, of the smaller number of students needing the additional time to graduate, more are persevering. So we're actually keeping kids to persevere. So we
They're
want our,
staying in the 5th year, but they're graduating at their 5th year.
or more. It could be more. We're actually re-engaging them, and we have full-time people on this who re-engage our students, and so it's a combination of online, it's a combination of, we have a menu of ways that we re-engage kids. But the thing to note here is that they're persevering.
They're not dropping out.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
How big is this cohort?
I
Year to year, you know?
It could be 100 kids. I don't know. I don't have the exact number. I mean, I have 100 because that's a number that where did I get the 100 from? Hang on. I'm confusing that number. I don't know. I can get back to you on that.
That'd be great if we can get the numbers. Because if that number, even though they're persevering, if that number grows, I think that would be another indicator of something going on. I'm glad they're persevering.
Yes.
One of my favorite graduations is the summer graduation when we do the kids who just needed a couple more extra time.
Yeah, that's right.
The progress towards attaining English language proficiency, the progress towards attaining proficiency, 41.8% of them met
That's correct.
met the target. Who
Yes.
sets the target?
The state does.
And is district by district, or is it just
It's
Commonwealth-wide?
statewide. It's statewide.
So Andover gets the same numbers we get?
Correct. It's measured by access, the same test that they all take.
On the chronic absenteeism, is there a lot of students right at 45 days? 4 days out of every 45? Is that what it is? 4 days out of every
Correct.
45?
Well, chronic absenteeism, as indicated in the past 45 days, if your student has been absent 4 days or more, you are already chronically absent. We have 180 days. You've already missed 4. In the 45 days, we consider you chronically absent. And so, let's see what the other target is. Did we write it on here?
How many days?
If
do
you
have?
see this chart, there's a chart in your packets that say K to 8. We have the 0 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 10. Do you see that?
Yes.
So the highlighted one that I'd like you to pay attention to is the 4 to 6. Do you see that? 4 to 6? If you've missed that many days so far, you're already chronically absent. However, you can see that we have students who are in the other buckets of 7 to 10 days, 11 to 15 days. It's a smaller amount of kids, but still, they've already pushed over.
Yeah. I mean, I think the reason why I asked that question is in the world of data, like there's low-hanging fruit, and then there's people that are at the tail end that are going to be a harder lift to change. That 1%, that's 15 days. There's other stuff going on.
Absolutely.
In that bucket of kids.
Yep.
But I'm still trying to, so it's 100, how many days of school?
180.
180 days and 45. So if you have one episode of 4 days in 45, that's it. You're chronic.
It's too many days. It's 45 days. I mean, think about that.
It's a month and a half. And of school days, it's not even a month and a half,
Correct.
days. And so, but I could go all 180
80 days.
days and do it 4 days in one cycle, and then it doesn't matter, I'm chronically absent.
In one cycle, 4 days? In 180 days?
If I do 4 days.
In 180.
In 180, I'm chronically absent.
No, then you move into a different bucket because that's 180 days. I'm giving you the snapshot between school started and now.
Yeah.
And we already have students who are chronically absent based on 45 days.
All right, 45 days is not a magic number. 45 days is the number of days we've been in school.
That's correct. Well, no, not even. We've had a little bit more, but I'm giving you the snapshot up to October, which is the
Gotcha.
data that I have most current,
Gotcha.
right?
Now
If I add the last 30 days, then, we are adding more days, and now it might be 6 days instead of the 4 days, you see?
This chart for last year.
Yeah.
In its totality would be very good,
Okay,
right? Because then we could see how many kids are in that 4 to 6.
gotcha.
Again,
also
we
wanna
want
give-
them to be at school all the time.
All the time.
But if
You'd
I-
like to see the comparison from last year?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we can do that. And also, as we were just discussing with the winter issues, we really are targeting January through June because we're going to put some interventions in place and we want to see, does that work or not? Does that make a difference? Or this issue of like snow and cold and everything else is really impacting and there's not much control that we have. So we can do both.
And again, I think when I first saw these at the LAE board meeting, I was taken aback. But now when you put them, I don't know if we had the neighboring rates of chronic absenteeism with it.
This is a new chart.
But I think it's telling.
Yeah.
It's not just us.
Right.
And so
It's-
I'm very, I'm upset about it, but I'm not as upset as I was before because I thought, man, if it's just us.
This chart was for a presentation that we did for families, and they were helping us do root cause analysis, is why you did not see
Yeah.
it before.
So Haverhill is up even higher than us in kids who are chronically absent. Am I reading that right?
You are correct.
And Lowell is, 0.5 less than us, but they're up 2.3%.
Yes.
Chronically absent. How we rate against other gateway cities, I would say the original gateway cities, because there's like 26 gateway cities.
Yeah, I can get that for you if you'd
But the
like.
original 13, I think, is the number.
Yep.
That's Brockton, and places like Salem aren't in that list. It would be also telling for us. And I don't know if, I was trying to get my things on. Did Member Seward ask you about what we are doing to those 8 schools? Not 8 schools,
The question was, what supports, can you give an example of supports for 2 of our schools? And so I offered the example of 2 of our schools. Teams are going to be going to additional training on how to lead teams internally so we can build their capacity.
And is there anything that specifically you guys are doing? I mean, you might still be just collecting data and creating and collecting feedback from parents. But is there any early indicators if you can change one thing right now that would have some impact
On,
on chronic absenteeism?
it's a mixed, but this idea that school could be more engaging for our older students is at the top of the list, for example. Our students were very vocal about that, about, this idea of getting the word out to our providers and specialists. So for example, we're going to be sending communication to all the pediatrics clinics, dental clinics, ophthalmologists. Go ahead and see our students, but please send them back with a note and encourage our families to bring the student back so they can get credit for the day, because most families don't know to do that. And so it would be good to have awareness across the community that if our student leaves for a dental appointment at 10 in the morning, they don't come back, they've missed the whole day. So getting that across our community is a big push that's going to happen pretty soon, too. And we think it's going to be a win. It's going to have a lot of kids in school back that are missing a lot of days.
So the doctor appointment piece.
Doctor appointment piece. It's mostly the specialist, quite honestly. It's not like your well care, because that happens once a year. It's these other tiny little visits that kids have during the year.
I mean, there's a lot of kids in that bucket.
Yeah.
13% of K through
Yeah.
8.
It's a lot.
You know, I mean, when you think about the high school with the engagement piece,
Mm-hmm.
16%, 9 through 12, 60% of the number of kids we have at the high school, I think that's around 4,500 students. That's not an insignificant number, but 13% of the rest of the kids we have in the system, that's a big number.
It is.
And so if we can move that 1 or 2 days on the other side of that 4, all right.
You're with us.
Anybody else? Ms. Mariano and then Dr. Rivera.
Superintendent, how aggressive are the parent liaisons in dealing with the chronic absenteeism at this point? I know you're talking about January's
Yeah,
coming in with
yeah.
new initiatives.
Yeah.
But what are they doing right now?
Well, that's a great question. They are charged with spreading the word. We feel strongly that more community members, families, everyone should know this data, so we can get a better sense of root causes and then start designing around that. The other layer of that is that administrators and teachers and staff have their own initiatives that are happening pretty aggressively right now. But right now, the parents and community are being charged with just spread the word, tell everyone what you've learned about our attendance, our patterns, your ideas around that.
I just, if I could continue, I just go back a few years and I think about parent liaisons making home visits.
Yep.
And going out to the families and interviewing the families and, you know, looking at root causes. Why aren't the children in school? Also, I remember an attendance panel that used to be held, that when the children reached a certain point, you know, you would ask the parents to come in and meet with the administration, the teachers and parent liaison to develop a plan to ensure that the children would be back in school. I was just wondering if any of that is still happening, or...
We still have a combination of that, including like attendance officer, which is in part what I think you are sharing. We do have home visits that still exist. And so those are for like our students who are needing a lot of support. What you see here, the majority of our kids are not that. They're kids who, you don't know, I don't know, I mean, according to what we've learned so far, are the kids who like, I don't feel like it today. And it adds up.
Well, that 4 to 6 is pretty significant.
It is.
At this point.
Before
Thank
snow.
you.
Dr. Rivera.
Yes, Superintendent Paris. So I just wanted to follow up on the comment that was made in regards to engagement. I definitely think we should be working on that, but I do know that part of the reason that some seniors have to miss school is because they have to work to supplement the income of the household with the high cost of rent
Yeah.
and everything going on. You also have parents who have to work an additional shift. They can't take care of the younger sibling, so the older student has to stay home with the younger sibling. So I was thinking, we did have this we were piloting a program of cooperative learning, of having seniors work and get some experience in the field, but maybe think about expanding that program, especially for those seniors who struggle with going to school and helping to provide for their families. We have many seniors that are graduating that have difficulty compiling a resume, so doing those basic skills, expanding that cooperative learning experience. That way they can be in school and still help their families at the same time.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to share.
Yeah, thank you.
that.
Anyone else? Thank you. The next item on the agenda is an item I think that folks have been anxious to talk about, the LAE and school committee working relationship. I don't really, I just thought something that folks wanted to talk about, so I'm just want to open the floor for discussion about how maybe people are seeing that and how we can begin engaging the LAE. As you know, myself and Member Mariano, we're on the LAE. And so I think that how we interact, I think is important to get that kind of out in the open, and I know there's been a lot of discussion. So, anyone care to comment on this matter or have discussion? Dr. Rivera?
Yes. So since the announcement of the transition from a receiver to an appointed board, there was no real instruction or discussion in terms of protocol, how the school committee would be interacting with the LAE. There was no, since the inception of the receivership and the turnaround plan, there was never any discussion in terms of a transition plan. Within that plan, had we known, the steps that we would have to take to transition toward a receivership board, towards local control, having all those things outlined would make it more clearer to the community. I think right now there's a lot of confusion between the LAE, the school committee, who's in charge of what, how's it gonna look like going forward. And going forward, I think it would be great if we worked very collaboratively, like a strong, cohesive team. And in order to do that, we would have to meet together to discuss some of the issues that the community brings up, because the school committee has no power authority to do things such as, review the budget, such as making policy that would help alleviate some of the issues that are impacting the community that they bring up towards our meeting. So it would be beneficial if we all met together and heard the public's concerns to be able to advocate for them, but also work together with the LAE in terms of creating policy. Because on the turnaround plan recommendations, one thing that was very clear is that there were specific recommendations made for the school committee in order to be an effective school committee. And one of those things is one of the recommendations made were to display evidence when proposing policy, but if we never have an opportunity to propose policy and express that evidence in the literature, then we're never gonna display the fact that we're ready, and we're never gonna take the steps towards transitioning back. So I think it would just behoove everyone in the community for us to all work collaboratively going forward, pretty much on a consistent basis. Right now, there's a lack of communication between both the school committee and the receivership board. We're not getting updates in terms of what happens at the LAE level. Most recently, there was a concern about the 1.6 million surplus in Chapter 70 funds that was brought to the City Council's attention, and so it was never brought forth in front of us, and we were kept out of the loop. So in having joint meetings with the LAE, it would just help us to work very smoothly and cohesively going forward to prevent issues like that from occurring.
Anyone else? Madam Stewart?
So I also think it would be helpful to have debriefs as a part of our regular agenda so that we are getting that information. But it also might make sense to start maybe forming subcommittees with joint school committee members and LAE committee members so that we could start looking, as Dr. Rivera said, at policy and budgets and gaining that experience. So I think that would be helpful as well.
I think, unless anybody else has anything to say, I think that there is a level of confusion both being in receivership, having an active school board, and having an appointed receivership board, in that no one really, at least for the school board part of it, no one wants to say, and I'm sure that that's part of the reason why the legislation ended up that way, that in taking the power away from the school board, you're really taking away the democratic power to elect your members to represent you in front of the public school system. And there would be, I think the reason why that didn't happen is I think that was the way they can get the legislation done on ed reform and the level 5 school district legislation. But knowing that, I think that what I was seeing and I thought was really encouraging was that members of this board were going to the LAE meetings and not only doing public participation, but also engaging members of the LAE board on matters that were important to them. I would encourage folks to do that, to attend those meetings and engage the membership. Again, myself, Member Mariano, Julia Silverio, who has a business and lives on Haverhill Street here in Lawrence, and Jessica Andors, who lives here on Jackson Court in the city, and Dr. Custodia Laura, who works all day at the Northern Community College. All of us are available for engagement on issues of policy and issues of problems that are facing the community. And I would engage folks to do that. I'm going to also try to submit a motion to the LAE board that they do send someone. We're not going to meet that often, as it appears. So, the number of times we meet, at the very least, an emissary, doesn't have to be the chair, from the LAE board should come to the school board meeting. I don't want to make it like a parliamentary system where they come and then we grill them for an hour. I think that having somebody here to hear what's going on at this meeting is essential for what's going on. I mean, we all have access to these meetings because they're public meetings, and we can get access to them if any of us wants to listen to them or watch them. But I'm definitely going to bring that back to the LAE board, and try to send an emissary every meeting to this meeting. And I would encourage people to do the same, the opposite. Now, as a process for us to get ourselves ready for taking back receivership, I think it's a good idea to do a subcommittee on and just to kind of in a subcommittee from the LAE board to discuss matters like the budget and those matters. I think that a joint meeting of the full boards together, I think, is hard, and I think it goes to the core of there is no real equal footing, and so I would hate to put us in a public space where there's a perception that there is equal footing, and I think that's my perspective on it. You can ask the chair of the LAE board, which I'm not, how he feels about the matter. But I think, again, I'm the chair. I can't make a motion tonight at this meeting, but I would encourage somebody to do such a motion to talk about a subcommittee of something like that, so that we can put that in front of the LAE board, or a motion to talk about us sending an emissary to them every meeting and them doing the same, and vice versa, or even getting through the superintendent a one-pager of the things discussed at the LAE board. The superintendent doesn't have to give us the rundown on it, but we sure could have it in front of us at this meeting and available to the public. I think that's a fair way to get engagement without muddying the waters in the matter.
I'd like to follow up on that.
Okay.
I think in order for us to transition successfully out of receivership, there needs to be collaboration, and that collaboration needs to happen in front of the public. I don't think it's about optics per se, and I know we don't have a say or vote in terms of what happens with policy, but we do have the ability to advocate for our community, to advocate for their democratic rights, to advocate in front of them, but also to ensure that their needs are being addressed. And all that can happen in front of the public in a collaborative way, without, there being, the level footing that you were referring to. I strongly believe that we really do need to work as a team, cohesively and collaboratively. It doesn't necessarily have to be, every month. I think a good way to start would be having, joint meetings quarterly to review these progress reports, to talk about how the receivership is going with the community, so that the community understands the current state of the receivership. But I really do think that it would be beneficial to the community if we were all working as a team together to make that happen.
Anyone else? I mean, on that point, I would suggest that what I'm suggesting doesn't mean we can't work as a team. I'm actually the opposite. I figure if we can all keep in communication with each other, I think everybody this board has it in front of their body, and they have it in front of our body, the time to come and make advocacy, whatever matter of the day is pressing. I think that's why they have public participation. But even further than that, and some of the members of this board has already availed themselves of that matter, communicating in writing about your positions on certain matters, I think that has a lot of impact. I think that, getting a letter about a matter that's in front of the LAE board or in front of the school department, and asking it for it to be addressed and making sure that folks know that you did send that communication, I think that would have a big impact. I just don't see, again, I get in trouble because I'm just way too honest about these things, that the receivership is set up in a way to have two boards having a discussion about one matter when really only 7 members have real ability to impact the decision. I think it's not fair to the public with this expectation that, listen, if I keep going to Dr. Marilyn Rivera with my issue and she can't get it accomplished because she doesn't have a vote on that, I'd rather them be clear about the real place where they're going to get something dealt with in a timely manner is to go to the LAE board or to the superintendent herself.
So I think there are a number of elements.
Seward.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I think there are a number of elements around this process that aren't fair, particularly around, folks not being able to come to their elected officials to ask questions. So I guess the real question is, how do we begin to start working together? And so hearing your concerns about the logistics of having, both board members meet together, and being concerned about messaging, what might make sense are quarterly meetings to evaluate reports that come out periodically. And so maybe there's less deliberation and more just meeting and talking about information that's being presented. And I suppose the second point is, for me, it makes sense to maybe make a motion to have joint subcommittees. So can I do that at this time?
Well, I would encourage you to like what matter is specific. If you want to delineate 1 or 2 subcommittees, then we can present that to the LA board. So a subcommittee on.
So can we have that discussion right now? Because I don't know necessarily that I want to make that decision. Can we get input from other school committee
Sure.
members?
Well, I think, so let's do this. Do the motion to I'm going to try to phrase it so we can record this properly.
Sorry.
The motion for, to establish a subcommittee with the LAE board on matters in front of the school system. And then we'll do a friendly amendment later as to which those matters are.
Thank you.
So there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Now for discussion on what those matters might be.
Thank you.
And I'll go first and say I think budget is the number one. But I would encourage us not to do 7 of them, subcommittees that is, having to both be at this meeting, at that meeting. I'm not looking for more meetings. I think budget's a good idea, but that's just my example.
I mean, I think there should
Dr.
be.
Marinara Rivera?
Thank you. Sorry. I think that there should be a subcommittee to evaluate the progress of the receivership. When a typical school committee is running the school district, the state is the accountability system for the school district. But when the state's in charge, the state's pretty much keeping themselves accountable. And I think we as a community need to keep everybody in check. And I think to have a subcommittee where we just review the quarterly progress reports together, we kind of troubleshoot any issues that are going on. If anything's impeding progress, we discuss that. But I think it would be really beneficial if we at least meet together to discuss those progress reports with the public.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. I don't want it to be that we're doing this subcommittee. It's going to be like in the back room, nobody showing up. When you have a subcommittee, it's a public meeting. You have to abide by the open meeting law. So, right, I just have 2, the budget and the progress on the receivership. Anything else? Member Mariano?
Just a point of clarification, or just to help me out to understand this. The subcommittees would be discussing a progress report. What is the difference with having someone, a liaison from the LAE board, come before this meeting and to discuss issues or whatever has been discussed, to give a report from the LAE board. Wouldn't that be the same thing? Or am I missing something here?
I don't think anybody's proposed that. I think what I had said earlier was somebody should come here and be present to take information back to the LAE board. Again, this is all subject to the LAE board voting to do this or not, or frankly, even the chair of the LAE board to even bring it on the agenda. So even if we vote tonight, I just want to manage expectations. Even if we vote tonight to do these things, it does not mean that these things will actually occur, depending on whether or not the receivership board votes to, or if the chair does not, the chair decides to put this on the agenda for a vote anyway. And so I think that we're going to encourage them, and I think it would encourage everybody here if we pass this motion to talk to the LAE board members to do that. But that wasn't something that somebody suggested. And I just don't know that if we asked for someone to come here that we would actually get that. I just don't know. But I know that if we asked to do it for a subcommittee, we might be able to get that because it's a group of people looking at the same information together. No one has to go before anybody else and be grilled. I got 2. Anybody, any other subcommittee members? I think 2 is manageable. So does somebody want to submit a friendly amendment to the original motion that the subject matter be both budget and the progress of receivership? Submitted by member Dr. Rivera. Would you accept it? Okay. So the motion on the floor is to send to the LAE board a request to establish 2 subcommittees, one dealing with the budget and one dealing with the progress of the receivership, and a number of the membership to be decided at a later date once they figure out whether or not they want to do the subcommittee. Is that a fair assessment of this? Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll take a vote. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All those against? Unanimous. So we'll do that in the form of a letter to the chair of the LAE board that we took this vote tonight, and we'll go from there. Thank you, Madam Superintendent.
Yeah.
Services update?
Yes, thank you. So I wanted to provide an update on nutrition services. And so in your packets, there's a memo that has been issued by our manager of nutrition services, Carol Noonan. And I'll summarize by saying that we're currently in partnership with Project Bread this year. And so the idea is that we want to pilot chef in school program on this challenge of some of the community feedback that we have received in the past years. So to date, Project Bread staff and nutrition services have completed a self-assessment. There have been focus groups, and now we've introduced the chef to assigned schools. So I wanted to share with you some of the things that we've learned and our next steps. So the self-assessment has addressed 5 areas. 1, the food handling and sanitation guidelines. 2, various cooking techniques and knife skills. 3, ordering and receiving methods and inventory management. 4, following recipes and skills. And lastly, presentation skills, most addressing the feedback that we've received from our community. Some of the things that we hope to see next is implementation and continuation of our breakfast in the classroom model, improved presentation of our meals to increase that participation, assisting with our staff training, in particular some of those things that I just mentioned, the presentation of a new menu, and then improve efficiency in our kitchens. So we're going to continue to explore alternative breakfast models so we can help gather the best practices that we've seen in some of our schools, and we'll offer several options to schools who are struggling to get our students to take breakfast. We've learned that our students like warm breakfast versus the cold cereals, so we're going to be addressing that. We've also planned additional training for our staff who would like to do a better job with the presentation, the overall presentation, and then also portions, which has been something that we've talked across. I've actually visited many of our schools and seen this myself. So an example is that, I'll share this example. So one of our preschools, the lunch was juca fries, chicken teriyaki kind of nuggets, but they weren't fried or breaded. And then we had pineapple, bread, I think that was it. Now, that portion for our preschoolers, 4-year-olds, was ginormous. And so our youngest kids take, one juca fry, couple chicken bites, one little bite of the bread, and they're pretty full. They're pretty full. And so those are things that we're working on in terms of the actual proportions so that across the district and developmentally, it seems appropriate. We've also learned some of the menu items that are more popular in our schools. I've seen this myself. So we have a Lancer Bowl. It's been named the Lancer Bowl. So what it looks like, it's in a little bowl, and the mashed potatoes come first. Then they have the pieces of chicken. They're actually chicken nuggets. It's sprinkled with corn and then gravy. Kids love this. And, it covers all the food groups. I don't know how happy parents would be, but this is like our #1 meal. I've seen it across our levels, and they love it. They love pizza, of course. They specifically like these little flatbread pizzas that we serve, hot dogs, anything with chicken. The salads, they're not fans of kale. Kale could be a little bitter. I mean, you got to really dress up kale. And our kids, every time we serve it, because, it's high in protein, it's got it's a powerhouse, they're not having it. But they love salads. They also, because they love to dress them up. So when I've seen the kids, it's presented in a little tin with chicken and, all the fixings, and they just love the dressing, and they're digging into the salad. So they're very good, hearty salad eaters. They also love the meatballs and the sauce with the pasta, particularly. We also know that there's things that they don't like. They don't like turkey in general. I mean, there's a turkey crumble thing we serve. They're not that happy with that. There is anything that's whole wheat, pasta, or brown rice, which, we consider pretty healthy and hearty foods, full of nutrients. They won't touch it. I saw in one of our elementary schools, it was chicken nuggets, broccoli, apples, and brown rice. Brown rice did not get touched. But the chicken nugget was being eaten with the ketchup, of course. So, we're trying a bunch of things here. We're trying to offer new things, healthier things. The presentation looks good. And so that's what we're taking inventory of right now. And then, of course, they don't like white milk as much, or the plain cereals. And, we tend to the level of sugars that we offer kids, so that's the other thing that we are under guidelines, and we have to mind those things. But kids tend to like the chocolate milk is what they're requesting, the strawberry juices, those kinds of other treats, what we would call treats. And things that are unfamiliar to them, they're also sort of telling us, no, that's not something we're interested in. So we're learning from that, and so we're going to be piloting. We're going to be having, where's my list of, here, I have the new dates of when we're going to be having the chef program. So we also have DESE review coming up on Monday, and this is a district doing the National School Lunch Program. The review, which begins, on November, next Monday, until the 3rd, and then we have school visits, so it's pretty intense. We'll have the lunch, the breakfast, the snack. We have review of documentations. It's an extensive review of our program right now that we're going to get by DESE. And lastly, WBUR is going to be featuring our Chefs in School program at the Partham Elementary on Monday, the 3rd at lunchtime. They're going to be sampling Korean-style chicken tacos and have a student vote on recipes. So also going to be asking kids to vote on our new menu system and take inventory of some of these new recipes to see if they're interested, if it's tastier for them, presentation, all those things that we've gotten feedback on.
Any questions? Any questions? Member Stewart.
So it looks like you have some great information from the focus groups from your kitchen staff, but has there been any thought to how we might be able to incorporate student voice into this process? Because I see there's a recommendation for a parent task force, but will there be a student task force, and will there be ways for students to give input?
Yes, so we're doing the survey specifically right now with our new menu. So every time we serve something new, we'll sort of survey and interview kids on like, what do you think, yes or no? So that's our first try at this, and we should definitely have student forums. That's a good idea.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Dr. Rivera?
Superintendent Paris, I just want to commend you on such a thorough assessment on the lunches, because this is what we've been hearing from the community, especially students. And I like that Member Seward wanted to follow up with a student focus group, because the entire committee received a letter, and I just wanted to state that for public record, because I really want to enforce student participation and youth participation in their democracy. And everything that you mentioned here, from portion size to the taste to certain meal preferences, is stuff that was included in the letters. Some of them said that the school lunches are terrible, they taste so bad. But they mentioned, again, they only serve 2 drumsticks or 2 breadsticks, it's not enough. So I just wanted to really give a shout out to those students that were brave enough to reach out to us in regards to advocating for improved lunches. I totally agree with this assessment. I think you did a great job, and I look forward to seeing improvements. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Now, the I just want to say, so part of this stuff was talking conversations with the people who prepare it, and I know,
Yes.
and so we have that group of employees is pretty diverse, and I'm sure they have some say in on what they'd like to see done to kind of make things better. Are you tapping them for that type of information? And I know they got to use some basic supplies that the district provides them based on what we can buy on the market. Are they going to have that type of input into how they can make, I don't know, whatever is the pork product or the turkey product, and that maybe convert it into some type of, what my mom used to call locrio, which is rice and
you'll see
and beat
that.
together with
Yeah.
tomato sauce and those things.
Yeah, they're definitely influencing.
I'm sure the kids aren't going to be that excited about it. I mean, I'm excited about it right now, but I haven't had dinner.
No, me too. You're making me hungry. Yeah, they're totally influencing the menu. And so an example of that is arroz con habichuela. So we're seeing that in some of our schools. They're being tested out in some of our kitchens. So we do have challenges of the cooking facilities in some of our schools, but where possible, our kitchen staff is not only experimenting, but they're very happy to make the things that they're really good at making, and the kids are receiving it really well. So that's another portion of this.
I'm excited about the listening part of us keep clicking. As long as there's a parent out there who thinks maybe their kids could be better provided a school lunch, I think that we should listen to those folks. Anyone else on the issue of nutrition service update? Thank you. Madam Superintendent, listening to our update?
Yes, of course, thank you. So I wanted to share with you a brief update so far in my 100-day listening tour. So I feel like I've completed it formally, but of course I still have a lot of people in synthesizing to do, so I wanted to give you an update so far. So I have had the opportunity to meet with city councilors, most of them. I still have a couple that are upcoming meetings, elected officials, parents, of course, students, teachers, administrators, and community members. In addition, I have visited to date I've had 83 school visits across our campuses. So my schedule is pretty much divided by, or driven, I should say, by school visits, which I'm at frequently. As a result, I've had the opportunity to do quite a bit of what I call FaceTime with some of these issues. I will share that on the trends, I have learned that open architecture is favorable among our staff, in particular administrators. They really appreciate the autonomy of making decisions on curriculum, budget, staffing, and other matters in their schools. Overall, the community really enjoys the enrichment programs that we've added as a result of open architecture and under receivership. And then I'm also seeing as a trend some of our challenges, in particular with recruiting and retaining some of our staff, and additionally with student services across our schools. So those are initial impressions. I will be completing a comprehensive synthesized report later this winter, and I will be happy to share that with you all when we meet next.
Any questions? How does this listening tour intertwine with the work that you're doing to update the turnaround plan?
Yeah, great question. So in part, this listening tour will inform my recommendations and next steps to address the turnaround plan. The turnaround plan, as it exists right now, we're operating under that, including the goals that are in that plan. So it doesn't change it right now, but it will influence recommendations towards what happens next.
And I wasn't sure, did you give a date certain when you think you'll be done the whole tour? You said you're kind of
Yeah,
done
I'm
now?
officially done.
All right, good.
Yeah, I know. Can you believe it?
How many days? I don't know.
100.
100 days.
Yeah.
Any further questions on the listening tour? All right. That's the end of the official agenda. Just so you know, I said earlier when I was talking at the public participation that we are going to have a landlord-tenant forum for tenants and landlords affected by the Columbia gas explosions. And that's going to be Thursday night, the 29th, at the Lawrence High School campus. Landlord forum is going to be from 4 to 6, and the tenant forum is going to be 6:30 to 7:30. With any questions folks have, in broad strokes, Columbia Gas is going to reimburse landlords for rents not paid, and there's got to be some agreement between tenants who've already paid rent when they weren't staying in there to have credited months in future dates. But all that kind of has to get worked out. Since the beginning of this, the number one way to make sure that tenants are made whole and landlords don't lose their house to their mortgage being in default is for them both to talk to each other so that they're not trying to both claim the same amount of money for the rent, and both of them being denied the check, and both of them kind of feeling like they're in jeopardy. But come to that night. There's going to be claim agents and support staff and people from the community, attorneys that advocate for tenants. All that stuff will be there and kind of support for the tenants, and also the Attorney General's office, which is driving it, the one that gave the guidance on this, because at the core of it, you really can't charge somebody rent if you don't provide them heat and hot water, which was everybody that was affected. But if you paid that rent, the idea is that the AG's office has created this process for Columbia Gas to pay the landlords, and then you can not have to pay that month's rent. And if you've already paid it, they're going to give you a future date in credit. That's the way it's supposed to work. So come Thursday night and get some more information. See nothing else, nothing further on the agenda. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Danny,
Yep. Member?
so I want to have a motion again about our meetings, our school committee meetings, about how I read the email about how we're going to have a quarterly now, and I want to have a motion to see if we could talk about it before this comes to a conclusion.
When's the next scheduled meeting?
February.
Well, we're not supposed to talk about stuff that's not on the agenda. And so I'm just concerned that matter is not on the agenda.
It's scheduling.
Say again? It's more than just scheduling. It's a conversation about the matter of meetings.
Our meetings last year were the fourth Wednesday of every month. I think the members are just trying to be clear in terms of the change and the scheduling, if we're going to continue the old schedule.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think it was pretty clear. The schedule was put out today. It's what the schedule is.
Usually we provide the public with an update of when the next meeting is going to be. I think that's
So the next meeting, as it stands today, is February. And I don't have that I don't have that date in
I
front
can
of me.
get that for you.
Entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. All those in favor? Aye. All those against?